Hi, good evening. This is Tanya Farrelly, and I'm delighted to be reading on the holding cell this evening. Just want to say many thanks to Simon and Roz for having me, and for everybody at home for tuning in. So, I'm going to read a story this evening called Death's Child, which will be in my second collection, which hopefully will be out next year. So, without further ado, I shall begin. Stay still. Don't worry about what's over my shoulder. Trassa, the social club coordinator, leaned in, her red lips and white face no more than an inch from his, as she penciled a black line around his eyes and then smudged it with her fingertips. Her nails glinted metallic silver. Such long lashes, she said, fingering them as he blinked. Any girl would die for those. She straightened, and Bernie allowed his eyes to refocus. Trassa stood before him, long legs covered only by a man's white t-shirt, a red sticky substance running down its front. Her dark hair was backcombed, riotous. She kept brushing it back from her huge blue eyes. Shame you didn't dress up, she said. You'd have made a mean vampire Lestat. She dipped her finger in the red paint and trailed a sliver of blood down his right cheek. There was more excitement among the staff than the students, Bernie reckoned. The staff room had become home to zombies and several sexy witches who milled around in tight black dresses sporting pointy hats or devil horns. If they strolled through Temple Bar, they could almost be mistaken for a hen party. Trassa, what are you supposed to be? One of the witches shouted across the room. Trassa shrugged. Death's child, she said. More creative than a trying to be sexy witch anyway, she mumbled, giving Bernie a wink. Right, you're done, Bern, she said. Who's next? In the bar, Bernie was almost sorry he hadn't worn a costume. He felt more obvious because he looked normal. Normal was the kind of thing to attract attention on a night like this. The room was thronging with students. He saw Alvaro from Madrid flirting with Cynthia from Sao Paulo, who was wearing, if wearing was not too strong a verb, a Wonder Woman costume that left little to wonder about. The teachers, all bar Shawnee, who was mingling with the students, were clustered in a corner of the room. Bernie tuned in and out of the conversation and watched Shawnee laughing with a girl in a Little Red Riding Hood costume. As though they sensed his eyes on them, they both suddenly turned. Shawnee raised his beer glass to Bernie and gestured for him to join them. Embarrassed, Bernie saw no alternative and made his way to the tightly woven group between him and his friend. Shawnee. You'd think he'd have learned his lesson after the last time. But no, the students were adults, as he put it, and that meant fair game. Bernie liked Shawnee, but sometimes he couldn't believe the nerve of the man. He'd marched into the director's office and asked her to move a student from his class after he'd had a one-night thing with her. He'd been a gentleman, he'd said, even dropped her back into the city centre the next morning. But the girl had expected more, a relationship maybe. She'd started undermining him in class, making pointed comments. He figured she told some of the other students too. He'd had to tell the DOS what happened, and the girl had been moved without so much as a reprimand for Shawnee to another class. Teacher! Bernie was waylaid by a hand on his arm on his way to the men's. He turned to see Alessandro and Victor. The two boys were never apart. Neither had shown up for class that week. Where have you two been? Bernie asked them. Victor laughed. Sorry, teacher. We had parties all weekend. Weekend? Bernie said. But this is Wednesday. It was a long weekend, Victor grinned. Alessandro nudged Bernie. What you think of the Brazilian girls, teacher? Hot, yeah? He mimicked a burning movement with his hand and laughed. Bernie laughed in turn but didn't comment. He saw Shawnee and Little Red Riding Hood disappear, probably gone out for a smoke. He exchanged a bit of banter with the two boys before disengaging himself and heading for the toilet. He was climbing the stairs when he heard a sound, a laugh. Feet silent on the thick red carpet, Bernie stopped at the turn of the stairs to listen, then stole quietly towards the sound. A door was open just off the corridor. He noticed that there was no handle on the outside. He pushed the door open a couple of inches. It was a storeroom of some kind. and enough light shone from the street light outside for Bernie to make out two figures standing opposite the window. Shawnee. A flash of white, a moan, jingle of steel as a belt was undone. No. Bernie stepped back, a foreign voice whispering, "Baby," as the hands crept beneath Jet's child's t-shirt. Bernie made her out in the orange haze, hair askew, bare legs wrapped around the waist of a cowboy as he slammed her hard against the wall. Christ, Bernie thought. Trassa. And her with a long-term boyfriend. A nice guy who normally showed up at the staff nights out. Connor. Was that his name? He'd seen him tagged in Trassa's Facebook pictures. What the hell was the girl thinking? Silently, Bernie withdrew. He went into the men's and locked himself in a cubicle, ashamed at the sight of Trassa had got him aroused. Pretty, quirky Trassa. He'd have tried it himself if he'd thought he'd stood a chance. But not when she had a boyfriend. There were lines you just didn't cross. Anger surfaced as he remembered what a fool Deirdre had made of him. 6 months it had been going on. She looked him full in the face and admitted it, no more remorse than a sociopath. She got bored, she said. Bored, that was a laugh. And she the one who sat at home day after day watching mindless television series. He didn't think she'd the energy to actually cheat on. Bernie cast a look at the door of the storeroom before hurrying down the stairs. He didn't hear anything. He practically collided with the school director as he pushed open the door to the bar. "Bernie," she said, "she got you too." "What?" The director waved her hand. "Trassa, she did a great job on the faces." Bernie didn't answer. He was taken aback for a moment by the director's outfit. A small black bowler was perched over her slick black bob. She glued fake lashes on one eye, and a set of braces covered her man's white shirt. "Barbara," Bernie stated. The eye was disconcerting. "Not tonight, Bernie. Tonight I'm Alex," she said. Bernie tried to smile. He had one eye on the door waiting for Trassa and the cowboy to return. He leaned in towards the director. "Maybe this is none of my business," he said, "but what if I were to tell you I'd seen a member of staff with a student upstairs?" "I know there's no rule against it per se, but..." Barbara moved closer. He smelt wine on her breath when she whispered, "Where?" "There's a storeroom. Turn right when you get to the top of the stairs." Bernie went to get his coat. When he looked around the room, the director was gone. He stopped to talk to a couple of teachers on the way out, huddled outside the door, smoking. "Have you seen Shawnee?" he asked them. They shook their heads. He'd expected to find him sharing a cigarette with Little Red Riding Hood. It was quiet in the staff room the next morning. 2 of the teachers had phoned in sick, and the director was hopping. Bernie glanced into the office on his way to class, but Trassa's desk was empty. He wondered if she'd rung in, too sick and ashamed to turn up for work, or if the director had got to her, if she'd come upon her in the storeroom with her cowboy. At break time, the director stuck her head out of the office and called him. He went in, heart skipping, wondering if she were about to tell him what had happened with Trassa. "Bernie, is there any chance you could cover a class this afternoon?" she asked. Bernie considered for a minute. "Yeah, sure. What level is it?" "Upper int. You should find the notes in Sean's folder." Barbara didn't look up, and Bernie left the office, feeling almost dissed. She was in some mood today. It seemed the staff weren't the only ones hungover. "Where's Sean?" one of the students asked. "I dunno," Bernie said. "Sick, I think." The blonde girl, who Bernie recognised as Little Red Riding Hood, looked concerned. He wondered if she'd spent the night with him. Bernie was surprised when he finished class to see Shawnee in the director's office. He moved around the staff room, pretending not to look, but everyone could see through the plate glass that separated the office from the staff room. The director was sitting, erect in her leather chair. Shawnee slumped somewhat in front of her. Bernie saw him spread his hands in a "what can I say" gesture. The director stood, and Shawnee did too. He didn't look happy. Bernie looked down at his papers as the door opened. He felt Shawnee stop and pick up his coat from a chair nearby. He looked up. "Shawnee, I took your class this afternoon. I've written it up for you." Bernie waved the folder at Shawnee. The director came out of her office, walking quickly, head down. She looked upset. Shawnee looked after her. Don't worry about it, Byrne, he said. He pulled on his leather jacket. Be seeing you, he said. A few people looked up and mumbled goodbye. Friday came and Shawnee hadn't returned. Bernie bumped into Trassa at the photocopier. She smiled at him, her red-coated smile. Her bracelets jingled as she worked the machine. How's Connor these days? Bernie asked her. The smile left Trassa's face. I couldn't tell you, Byrne. We're not together anymore. Oh, God, I'm sorry. Byrne touched her braceleted arm. It's okay. We split up about 3 months ago. Okay. Sure, maybe we could get a coffee sometime. If you want to talk or anything. He hoped it sounded casual. Trassa smiled. Yeah, maybe, she said. She glanced around the room and then leaned in conspiratorially. Have you heard about Shawnee? She said. Bernie shook his head. He's not coming back. Apparently the director walked in on him the other night with a student. Bernie made a surprised sound. Not against the rules, though, is it? He said. Trassa raised an arched eyebrow and gathered her papers. Not yet, but they'll get you on something else. Think from here on in, we'll all have to be careful. His eyes followed the sway of Trassa's hips as she climbed the stairs. Poor Shawnee. He'd wondered where he'd vanished to with Little Red Riding Hood. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening. And again, thank you to Roz and to Simon for having me this evening. I hope you enjoyed it. And I certainly look forward to listening to more great readings on The Holding Cell. Thank you and good night.